Imagine watching, like a bank robber parade down Main Street.
Oh, just right out in the open?
Yeah, exactly. They are on a float made of stolen money, and they are throwing confetti, waving at the police officers lining the route, and the police, well, they just wave back.
That is wild.
Right. The crowd is watching this happen in broad daylight. Nobody is confused about who the robber is. Nobody is confused about where the money came from. But the parade just, it keeps rolling.
It's just business as usual.
Exactly. And that feeling of absolute mind-bending absurdity, that is the exact political reality captured in a blisteringly cynical poem we are diving into today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks. I mean, it is a profound level of cognitive dissonance for a society to endure, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We're looking at a piece titled Horosamaga Helowin. It's written by Wira Thungat W. Namal, and that roughly translates to the concept of being naked with the thieves.
Such a striking title.
It really is. It is a surgical, merciless dissection of systemic political corruption. And really, it's about the total failure of legal accountability in a society where, honestly, everyone already knows the truth.
And before we get into the heavy details, we need to set the parameters for you listening, because this text, it pulls absolutely no punches.
None at all.
It isn't dealing in vague, abstract metaphors about greed. It names specific, highly charged political factions.
Right, like the JEP.
Yes, the Janata Vimukthi Peramuna, and it touches on massive, real-world national controversies in Sri Lanka.
So I should just jump in here to explicitly state that our goal for this deep dive isn't to endorse or take a side on these specific real-world political viewpoints.
Right, we have to be clear about that.
Exactly. We were just putting this poem under a microscope. We want to impartially analyze the ideas, the themes, and the intense frustrations the author conveys in the source text.
We want to understand the architecture of an argument that claims an entire nation's justice system is essentially a theatrical production.
Yeah, the author is mapping out a landscape defined by a brutal paradox.
How so?
Well, we are presented with a world where there is massive, undeniable public awareness of state-level crimes. Like literal mountains of evidence.
Right.
Regimes fall, new political guards step into power, promising reform. And yet, the architects of these crimes, the thieves as the poet calls them, they never seem to face a courtroom.
They just get away with it.
Always. The poet is asking you to consider the mechanics of that impunity. How does a system ensure that so much is known by so many people while guaranteeing absolutely zero consequences?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the poem does not ease you into this concept. It drops you straight into the deep end with a catalog of unpunished horrors.
Yeah, it gets dark very fast.
It does, and it is vital to note that the author doesn't start by complaining about, bribery or missing tax revenue. They start with blood. The early stanzas hit you with references to extreme violence and the subversion of democracy. The poem explicitly names the murder of innocent devotees in the Easter attacks. It brings up the postponement of elections. It even mentions the Badalanda torture camps.
And for context, placing those names in the text, it carries an immense haunting weight.
I can imagine.
Yeah, the Badalanda references invoke a very specific dark stain on the national consciousness. It was a notorious state-run facility from the late 1980s, linked to horrific torture and disappearances.
Just horrific stuff.
And the Easter attacks, well, those referred to the coordinated bombings that completely shattered the country. The poet is deliberately grounding their critique in the absolute deepest traumas the nation has experienced.
And then the text points to specific, highly publicized murders that shock the public. It mentions Lasantha and Thajudeen.
Right, very famous cases.
And again, to understand the poet's fury, you have to know who these people were. Lasantha Wickramatunge was a prominent, courageous journalist who was assassinated in broad daylight. And Wasim Thajudeen was a high-profile national rugby player. His brutal death was initially and incredibly controversially masked as a simple car crash.
Even though there were massive allegations of severe torture.
Exactly. The poem even notes youths being killed for ransom. So reading this section, it's like walking into a police station and looking at an overflowing, horrifying cold case file where everyone knows the suspect.
Yes, exactly like that.
But I have to push back a little here. Are these references meant to be seen as individual crimes, or is the poet using them to make a broader point about the system itself?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the poet isn't just listing crimes. They are diagnosing the systemic paralysis.
Okay.
The sheer gravity of those cases establishes the stakes. The poet is demonstrating that the justice system's failure isn't limited to complex, victimless, white-collar crimes.
Right, it's not just some accounting error.
No, the system fails, even when the crimes are visceral, violent, and completely undeniable. The most vital line in this entire section is the poet's assertion that the police and the courts simply turned a blind eye to these atrocities.
They just turned a blind eye, meaning they didn't just miss the clues.
No, they chose not to look. And that renders the justice system completely complicit.
Wow.
Yeah, by invoking names like Lasantha and Thajudeen, these were cases that were dissected daily in newspapers and on television.
Everyone was talking about them.
Right, cases where the cover-ups themselves became public knowledge. So the poet is arguing that ignorance is impossible. The authorities know. The public knows. The blindness of the courts is a calculated, deliberate choice.
That casts a terrifying shadow over the entire concept of the state, right? Knowing that the institutions built to protect you are choosing to look away while citizens are tortured or murdered.
It's deeply unsettling.
But then the narrative transitions. The poem pivots away from the hidden dark violence and moves into a completely different realm of corruption.
Right, the financial side.
Exactly. It shifts from the blood to the ledger, pointing to massive financial scandals like the central bank heist.
And the central bank bond scam, I mean, it wasn't a discrete physical robbery. It was a staggering, complex financial manipulation that allegedly drained the nation's coffers.
And the poet places this massive economic theft side by side with the violent atrocities.
Which feels a bit jarring at first, you know?
Yeah, you have Battlelanda torture camps in one stanza and a bond scam in another, but the outcome is the same.
Exactly. Whether a regime steals the nation's wealth or murders innocent people, the institutional response is identical.
Absolutely nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
Here's where it gets really interesting. As the poem transitions into these financial crimes, the author zeroes in on something that seems to infuriate them even more than the theft itself.
The visibility.
Yes, the sheer, unapologetic visibility of the plunder. We move from crimes covered up in the dark to corruption that is paraded down the street. Going back to that bank robber float analogy from earlier.
It fits perfectly.
The poem lists claims of stolen wealth that are almost cartoonish in their scale. We are talking about literal jets being taken to Uganda.
Jets.
Private jets. The poem claims that commissions are baked into absolutely every single state project. It points to corruption, allegedly rotting the core of national sports like rugby and cricket.
Nothing is sacred.
And then it points to the real estate, luxury houses being built in Malwana and Kataragama using ransom money.
In those locations, Malwana and Kataragama, they aren't just random addresses in the poem.
What do they represent?
In the public consciousness depicted by the poem, they represent monuments to unexplained, massive wealth. They are literal mansions built while the broader country struggled economically.
So they stand out.
Massively. The poet uses them as geographic symbols of absolute impunity.
But this forces a massive logical paradox, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if the assets are this massive, literally private jets and sprawling mansions, how does the poet explain the total lack of arrests? I mean, you can hide a bribe in a briefcase. You cannot hide a luxury estate in Malwana.
And that paradox is exactly what is driving the poet's frustration. The poet explicitly notes that despite all of this staggering, obvious accumulation of wealth, not one thief is caught.
Not a single
one.
man.
And the poet doesn't think this is because the thieves are criminal masterminds who perfectly cover their tracks. To the poet, the audacity of the theft proves that the perpetrators have absolutely no fear of the law.
It's like a psychological weapon.
Exactly.
If you are terrified of the tax authorities or the police, you hide your stolen wealth in offshore shell companies. You bury it. You don't build a highly visible luxury mansion.
Operating so openly is a flex.
Yeah. It is the perpetrators signaling to the public, we can do this right in front of your face and the law cannot touch us.
And they want the public to see those mansions because it proves that the legal system is subordinate to political power.
Which naturally brings us to the response of the state. Because if the crimes are public and the wealth is visible, what exactly is law enforcement doing?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. They can't just be sitting in empty offices playing solitaire.
Well, the police and the investigative bodies are actually portrayed as being incredibly busy.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, but the poet paints a mocking, deeply despairing picture of what that business actually looks like. It is depicted as pure bureaucratic theater.
Bureaucratic theater. I love that phrasing.
It's just a simulation of justice designed to appease the masses without ever delivering a result.
And the imagery the hosts highlight from the poem here is just brilliant and exhausting. The poem talks about how for 2 straight years, YouTube channels have been loudly promising imminent arrests.
Every single day.
Yeah, the headline is always, today or tomorrow, they are going to jail. Meanwhile, the CID, the Criminal Investigation Department, and various police commissions are shown doing a massive amount of physical labor.
But not the labor of slapping handcuffs on corrupt politicians.
No. The poem describes them filling cabs, lorries, and gunny bags with endless files and papers.
Just visualization of justice being reduced to mountains of stationery.
Right. Lorries full of paper moving from one government building to another. It's like a hamster wheel. A tremendous amount of exhausting movement that goes nowhere.
Exactly.
But let me push back on the poet's cynicism for a second. If a government is actually going after high-level, systemic, corruption-like, complex financial crimes, offshore accounts, embedded commissions, that requires an unbelievable amount of paperwork.
It does.
You can't just arrest a former official without a bulletproof paper trail or the case gets thrown out. So isn't gathering massive amounts of evidence and filling files a necessary part of the legal process? Why is the poet so dismissive of the paperwork?
What's fascinating here is that the poet understands investigations require files, but they view this specific paperwork not as a genuine investigation, but as a deliberate stalling tactic.
A stalling tactic masquerading as procedure.
Yes, the bureaucracy is the shield.
Yeah.
The poem claims these investigations drag on for 5 years with no resolution.
5 years.
And it points out how cases seemingly only open up or gain momentum near election cycles.
Oh.
Right. It takes decades just to read the files,
Yeah.
according to the poem. So what happens while those files sit in lorries and gunny bags?
Nothing, I'm guessing.
Exactly. The old thieves are allowed to continue enjoying their extreme luxury in Malwana and Kataragama, while the public waits for a justice that will never arrive.
So the system uses the language of justice like, we are investigating, we are gathering evidence to permanently defer actual justice.
It pacifies the public.
You see a lorry full of files pulling up to the CID and you think, okay, finally something is happening, but nothing is happening.
And that profound exhaustion leads us directly to the ultimate cynical conclusion of the poem.
Tying the historical corruption back to the current political landscape.
Exactly, and it brings us back to the exact meaning of the title itself, Horu Samaga Heluin, or Naked with the Thieves.
Right. Because the poet doesn't just blame the old guard who committed the original crimes, they take dead aim at the new guard.
Specifically, the poem focuses its critique on the JEP.
The political faction that theoretically represents the promise of change. The ones who step in to break the cycle of the old corruption.
Right, the new guard comes into power, presumably carried by the public's desire to finally see the thieves punished.
But the poem claims the JEP is suddenly hesitant to catch the corrupt figures.
Hesitant is putting it mildly.
Yeah, the poet literally makes a wager in the text. They bet that the new guard cannot put the old thieves in jail.
Instead of sweeping house, the poem observes that the new guard hides behind excuses.
Like what?
They say things like, well, it's up to the law now, and they simply refer matters back to the Attorney General.
The same Attorney General's office, the same courts, and the same police force that the poet already established as willfully blind.
The exact same ones.
So what does this all mean? It makes me think of a new referee stepping onto a playing field that everyone in the stadium knows is blatantly rigged.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
The goals are different sizes, the field is tilted, and the players are openly handing cash to the linesmen. And the crowd elected this new referee to stop the madness and fix the game. But instead of halting the match and demanding a fair field, the new referee just blows the whistle, shrugs at the furious crowd, and says, hey, I don't make the rules, it's up to the rule book.
Exactly.
But I have to ask, does the poet believe the new guard won't prosecute because they are secretly corrupt themselves, or that the system is so fundamentally broken that they simply can't?
This raises an important question, but if we look closely at the poet's framing, the distinction between won't and can't actually ceases to matter.
Really? Why?
Because, to the author, the outcome is identical. The thieves remain in their mansions. Zero accountability.
Right. The victim doesn't care if the police officer is bribed or just powerless. They just know their stolen TV isn't coming back.
Exactly. And by choosing to rely on a hopelessly compromised legal framework by saying, now they act, saying it's up to the law, the new guard becomes actively complicit.
They use the broken system as an alibi.
Yes. And that is where the title perfectly captures the author's view. Naked with the Thieves.
Because inaction strips away any moral high ground.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if you wear the colors of a reformer. If you play the exact same game of bureaucratic delay while the guilty walk free, you are left exposed. You are naked.
You are left standing in the exact same room as the people you promised to lock up.
Participating in the exact same game of power. The poem concludes that this endless game will continue until death, and the JEP is now just wasting time naked with the thieves.
Wow. That is an incredibly heavy, powerful diagnosis of a society. So to summarize this deep dive for you listening, Horu Samaga Heloin is so much more than a list of grievances.
It really is.
It is a dark, powerful diagnosis of a paralyzed society where the mechanisms of accountability have actually been weaponized to protect the guilty.
The paperwork isn't there to build a case. It's there to build a wall between the criminals and the consequences.
Leaving the public trapped in an endless loop. And just as a brief reminder, while we spent this deep dive exploring these very heavy allegations to understand the poem, we are looking strictly at the poet's perspective.
Right, we are not endorsing these political claims.
Exactly. But I think you have a final thought to leave us with.
I do. The poet forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable scenario. If massive public awareness, literal truckloads of evidence, and even complete changes in political leadership consistently fail to produce accountability, as the poet claims, what happens to a society?
That's the big question.
Does true justice eventually require a completely different mechanism outside the current political framework altogether? Or does the public simply learn to live with the thieves?
Something for you to mull over. It's a terrifying thought, but it's the exact question this poem demands you answer. Until next time, keep questioning the systems around you.